Hey, Oshade! All right. Hi, guys. Welcome. Thanks, Lily. Hi, guys. My name's Abby. For those of you that don't know me, I am so excited that you guys are all here. I'm so excited to finally be back. I feel like we haven't been here forever. I feel like you guys haven't been in school for forever. Adults don't get snow days, so it feels like a smack in the face every time I find out. Again, you guys are laying in pajamas, and I am in the office working, slaving away. But I am so glad to be back here. I have a little bit of work to do to get us back into our series because we did take a week off. So I want to remind you kind of what Tori and Bettina were talking about, Katie talked about 2 weeks ago. You know, we're in this series called Mine. What does it look like to take our faith and make it our own? What are things that we can do to engage and make that happen? And so they talked about serving. And Katie specifically said that serving and growing are directly related. Right? She gave us examples about how when we choose to serve, we can see how our faith grows. And she talked about how that's happened in her own life. And then this last week, Steve had an awesome message prepared. Unfortunately, we didn't get to hear it. So I'm here to just bring a quick summary of what that looks like. We did talk about it in the mix this last weekend. So for those of you, this is a little refresher. But Steve was planning on sharing how it was important to remember that when tough times happen, which we all experience, we all have these times in our life that are challenging. We think of them as turning points, right? We can look at our life, what was it like before this happened and where we're at now and how we responded to it. And in those tough times, God works in us so that he can work through us. And we actually looked at this story in John 11. Jesus was with his friends, Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. And you might have heard those names before. They come up. We talk about that story. But for those of you that don't know, Lazarus actually had died. And Mary and Martha had sent word to Jesus. He was in the town over, and they asked him to come. And he came, and Martha and Jesus had this exchange and was like, Jesus, if you had been here, this wouldn't have happened to my brother. She has faith. She knows who Jesus is and the power that he has. But she chooses that even though he didn't show up when she wanted him to, she chose to believe that he still was who he said he was. Even though she felt disappointed, that she was angry, that she just lost her brother, she still chose to have faith in who Jesus was and the experience that she already had. This really challenging situation, she chose to believe in who God was and let him work in her so that she can work through her. Because what actually happened in that story was that Jesus came, had this exchange with Martha, and he said, hey, that's not it. You know, he experienced, that's where the shortest verse in the Bible happens. It's in John 11:35. For those of you that don't memorize that much scripture, this one's going to be an easy one for you. It's 2 words, but it's powerful. The verse is, Jesus wept. So in the mix of all this stuff, when he's having this exchange with Martha, and she's upset and she's angry, but she's choosing him, he sits with her in her pain. And he shows that he cares. And that's who we choose to put our faith in. Jesus is who we choose to put our faith in. Yes, we show up to church, and our church specifically has things that we believe in, that we support, serving, and we have a mission organization that we work with, and other kinds of ministries that happen here. But when we put our faith in something, we put our faith in Jesus Christ. The person that he was when he was here on earth, the life that he lived, the ministry that he did, the relationships that he had, his death on the cross, and his resurrection from the grave. That's who we put our faith in. And he is a relational God. We see that in 2 words in the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. And so he sat with his people. He sat with his friends mourning the loss of his friend Lazarus, who it says in that story earlier in the chapter 11 that it was his beloved friend. They were tight. They were close friends. But that wasn't the end of the story. Jesus actually raises him from the dead. He says something crazy. He says, hey, I know Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days, but open the tomb. Which, guys, if you don't know stuff about like dead bodies, which, I mean, that's totally real. I don't know a lot about them, but when bodies start to decompose, they smell. Like, Jesus asking people to do that was weird. But they'd seen Jesus do crazy things in the past, so they trusted him, and they opened the tomb, and Lazarus actually came out. Jesus raised him from the dead. Unbelievable. So Martha and Mary were at this point where they were like, hey, tough times. My brother just died, but I'm choosing to believe that you are who you say you are. And Jesus sits with them. And then he does this unbelievable miracle, brings their brother back from the dead, and it says that the people that were with them, they believed in who Jesus was because they saw Mary and Martha trust in Jesus despite what happened to their brother. So God works in us in tough times, but so that he can work through us and help us strengthen each other's faith. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about what it looks like to be in community. Why it's so important for us to be in small groups and to come and gather here, because when we sit and we talk and we challenge each other and we have accountability in our relationships in small group, it sharpens our faith. It allows us to grow deeper and stronger together because we do it in community. We're created that way. And this was another example of that in John 11, where it says that the people saw that God worked in them and what they did in their heart, and he worked through them to the people around them. And we get to do that too. When we have situations where we are challenged with something, whether that's a broken relationship with a parent, our parents did something and we're not too happy about it, whether it's a friend who just absolutely hurt us in a way that we don't know how to even talk to them anymore. People are watching us. People are looking at what we're going to do. Are we going to choose to do the hard work of forgiveness in that relationship? Are we going to choose to respect our parents even though we don't like what they did? Yes, when we do those things, people see them, and it allows God to work in us so that he can work through us to other people. How exciting is that not only that we have this personal relationship with Jesus, that he changes us from the inside out, but he uses that change to change other people. That's powerful. We get to be invited into that when we say yes to trusting who God says he is in challenging, tough times. So that was what we were planning on talking about last week. I just wanted to catch us up to speed, and it actually sets me up for what we're talking about today. And I'm really excited. It's going to be challenging, but I think it's going to be really worthwhile. I spent a lot of time with God just sitting and letting him use what he wants, use me the way he wants tonight. And so I have a message for you that I really feel like maybe a lot of someone's in this room are here to hear, and I'm just privileged to do that. So I want to introduce you to a friend of mine, and this friend is, we have a long past. We were a lot closer when I was about your guys' age in middle school. I hung out with her, and she was around mostly when I was at church. When I was in small group and went to camp and on retreats, she was always seeing me around when I was talking about God or my faith. But she always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I don't know if you ever hung out with someone like that. Like, she always kind of made me feel insecure. She questioned me. She kind of pushed me out of my comfort zone, made me feel like maybe I don't know exactly what I'm talking about. We would hear stories, that we would have small group leaders and teaching pastors, and they would share stories about Jesus, kind of what I just talked about with Lazarus, and she would whisper these comments of like, you don't actually believe that, do you? That's crazy. How can that be real? And I remember sitting there like, oh, like I've seen God and I experienced him, but maybe she's right. Maybe she is making a really good point. And I remember her loudest in my head when I would have pastors teach me about God's love and his grace. This is something I struggled with my whole life trying to wrap my head around. Like, what do you mean it's free? Like, we just have to accept Jesus and he loves us unconditionally? Like, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to be anything. I don't have to be enough or do enough. But I would receive this message. I'd hear it over and over about who Jesus is and why he came and what he thinks about me. And she would whisper to me again, and I would hear, you don't deserve that. Who are you to think that you deserve free, unconditional, relentless love? You haven't done anything for that. And she would make me feel so vulnerable. I mean, honestly, I would feel trapped in this place where I was like, well, yeah, you're right. Like, I don't do enough. I don't pray enough. I don't serve enough. Like, maybe I don't deserve that. She especially would show up when I would hear stories that that we read in the Old Testament specifically, right? Like Noah's Ark, like, okay, 2 of every animal fit on one boat. Really? Or that Jesus touched someone's eyes with mud and they like stop being blind? I don't see that happening today. Like, why do we believe that happened then? And she put me in this place, especially at church in my small group. I was like, these questions were coming up, and I felt on edge, and I didn't know how to talk about it, and she almost made me feel like I was the only one that felt that way. And isolated me from my small group leaders, from my parents, from people I could ask to find assurance in these things. I think a lot of you have met my friend before, actually. She goes by Doubt. Whether you know it or not, walking around in your faith journey, I think you've probably experienced before what she does. She puts us in this place where we're hearing something up on stage, or maybe our small group leader says something, and instantly we're like, that doesn't sit right with me. Or how can that really be true? Am I the only one that's really thinking that that's weird? I think we all have experienced doubt. And it's an uncomfortable topic, right? You're kind of like looking around like, is she really talking about that? Are we allowed to talk about that here? Like, it feels like that's the one thing that we're not allowed to say, right? We like talk about all these crazy things. Like I said, like the Noah's Ark, that's bizarre, okay? Big boat, one guy builds it. All the animals come from all these directions, get on the boat. The flood, no more people except this boat is safe. Guys, that's a weird story. Or how about Jesus walking around and interacting with people that are possessed by demons? Like, I've never interacted with someone that was possessed by a demon, and the Bible makes it seem like they were everywhere. I had some questions when I was sitting in a seat like yours, but I didn't ask them because I didn't want people to think that I didn't believe. I didn't want people to think that I thought God was a liar. I didn't want God to think that I thought that. I felt like if I acknowledged the fact that I had questions or things that made me feel concerned or worried, that all the other things that I wanted to believe that were true meant that those weren't true either. Like all the things that it says about how much I'm loved and cherished and how there's a purpose for my life and how I want to live in community with people and how there are these standards of what it looks like to live with one another in the world that I want to be a part of, that if that is all true, how can I doubt these other things? Like, how do those things work? How can I be for a part of it, but wrestle with another? And so I think that we perpetuate this idea that we can't talk about this stuff. We can't have questions. But here's the thing. I've got questions. Your small group leaders have questions. I know you've got questions. Maybe they don't come to mind right now. Maybe if you even sat and thought for a couple minutes, you're like, no, I'm pretty good with this whole thing. Maybe you've believed for a really long time and you feel like it's too late for you to have questions. But guys, I still ask questions, right? Like I read in the Bible sometimes, I'm like, God, how can you ask me to do all these things? Like it's overwhelming. How am I supposed to be you? How am I supposed to be a reflection of you? It seems like a really big task. So what do we do with these doubts? Well, as we wrap up this last series, I've got one more story I want us to take a look at. It's from Jesus' friend Mark. He wrote an account of one of the Gospels. And so he has this story in chapter 9 of these people, and I want this to be really clear. Like, we're talking about this in 2019, and, I referenced some of my life, which, again, is not, I was born in 94, so not that far into history, but I want us to recognize that people throughout history have had these questions and doubts. That people that interacted face to face with Jesus doubted him. People that saw him do these crazy things doubted him. So it's not that we are on the outside of like, oh, if I only saw this in person, then it would be fine. Or now because it's so far in the past, like there's so much things separating, like how do I make this jump? Like it's okay to have these questions and doubts. That's what I want you to hear. And I want to show you why it's okay, because I want to show you Jesus' response to someone who is so clearly questioning him in this story in Mark 9. So I'm going to read verse 9, 16 to 18. So right before this, I just want to make it clear. So Jesus was off with 3 of his disciples, and they were coming back to the rest of his group of disciples, and some of the religious leaders were questioning them. So this is the scene that we're walking into this verse. So Jesus is coming up on this group of people, and this is what he says to them. He says, "What are you guys arguing with them about?" he asks. And a man in the crowd, someone off to the side, answers, "Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." Okay, so picture that scene. This guy brings his son who's been possessed by demons. And again, I want to say, it might be hard for you guys to picture this. It's hard for me because again, other than like creepy TV and movies, which like I'm totally not into, and if you are, no judgment, like you do you, but that stuff freaks me out. Freaks me out. It makes my skin crawl and it keeps me up at night, and I have crazy dreams, and so I don't watch it. And this is what we're reading in the Bible. So this man shows up and asks Jesus, like, "Hey, this is my situation. What are you going to do about it?" This dad comes to Jesus, right? Like, Jesus came to this village. Like, there might have been whispers of who Jesus is and what he's doing all throughout the area. And so this dad brings his son. He's like, "I need someone to help me." And maybe this Jesus guy can do it. So maybe this is his last resort. I know I've heard that Jesus has done stuff, but let's check it out. So Jesus asked the boy to be brought to him, and the story continues in verse 20 to 22. So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground. He rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus looked at his father and the boy and asked, "How long has he been like this?" He said, "From childhood. It has often thrown him into the fire or water to kill him." Can you imagine that, guys? I know that most of you don't have kids yet. I don't either, but can you imagine someone really close to you, seeing them go through this experience, and you just need someone to help them. You just want relief for them. And this dad goes, "If you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." Now, we know about Jesus, right? We know what he's capable of. We've talked about his power, right? Like a couple stories ago, like these whispers are going around. Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. He came and he calmed a storm with a single word. He's healed all these diseases. And this guy's saying, "If you can, if you can." And maybe in the moment, the guy, didn't really think about it. Maybe he just wants this relief. But he had doubt, right? That's what that's saying. Like, I've heard this stuff. I haven't experienced it for myself, but can you help me? Most people wouldn't actually say something like that, right? Like if you heard someone, like there's whispers, you kind of like wait to see how it plays out. Maybe they'd fake it. I think a lot of us try to fake it. We just want people to think we know what's going on. We want them to think we have it all together. This dad doesn't hide his feelings. He lays it out there. He's like, "Hey, I'm at my wit's end. I gotta help my boy. Can you help me?" And Jesus repeats what he says. And I don't think he does that to make fun of him. It could come off as condescending, but I really think that Jesus is acknowledging where he's at. I think he's saying, "Hey, I hear you." And so Jesus says in the next verse, "If you can, everything is possible for the one who believes." And if I had heard that, I would have been like, "Whoa, Jesus, that's not what I meant, man. Hey, I don't want to get you offended. I'm sure, like, you're God. Like, I know you said that. The Spirit, like, whatever, backpedaling. But the dad doesn't do that. He's like, "This is me. This is how I really feel." He owns it. He owns the doubt. But the cool thing is, like right after Jesus says that, The dad claims, he's like, in the next verse it says, immediately the boy's father explained, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. Which is weird, right? It's a weird thing to say. How can we believe and have unbelief? It's almost like saying, I do believe, but I don't. I want to believe this, but I've got my questions. I want to have faith. But I've got doubts. I really need this to be true. Maybe you felt that. I really need what Abby is teaching me about Jesus to be true. I just don't know. I really need what my small group leader is telling me the truth right now to be true, but I just don't know. And so in this story, we see that is okay. But it's hard because sometimes we get caught up in this place where we're like, how can I do both? We don't live in a world that accepts the tension of things. We don't live in a world that likes feeling that it's either one way or another. You either agree with me or you don't. You either like me or you hate me. You're either a fan of mine or a hater. We don't live in tension well. So what does it look like to live with belief and unbelief? And so I want us to cue into how Jesus responds to this, because this is going to help us. Because the reality is we live in a world that has tension. We can have friends that we don't always agree with. We can love someone we don't always agree with. We can love someone and have faith in them that we're not always sure. That's okay. I'm going to show you that that's okay in Jesus' response. Jesus says it's okay. He doesn't walk away when the dad says that. That's how we know. You know, when I was your age, again, like I said earlier, I was so stricken with fear that if I verbalized the fact that I doubted what God was saying or something that I read in the Bible, that I would be disqualified from all the promises. I carried that weight on my shoulders. I showed up week after week to small group, to my youth group. I was a leader in places. I did all these things. But in the back of my mind, there were these doubts that I wasn't sure how to wrestle with, because if I felt like if I verbalized them and I shared them with people, that would disqualify me and I would be on the outside. But here we see in this story with Jesus that he doesn't disqualify this dad. He doesn't shake his head and turn away. He doesn't raise his voice at him. He doesn't tell him to get out. He heals his son. He does. We see that in the next couple verses. We see that in the next couple verses. He says that he brings the boy to him and heals him. Guys, dealing with doubt is a part of growing your faith. It is. If you want to do what we've been talking about, if you want to see yourself grow, like, yes, serve. Yes, get connected. Yes, show up to small group. Yes, engage in small group. Yes, trust in God in the hard times. Try one of those things. But recognize that if you have doubts and questions, you can't just shove them into the back of your mind for them to go away. Because they don't. I know that. It's when I started asking questions and I was vulnerable with my small group leader, when I was vulnerable with my parents. I asked them, I was like, how do you guys look at this world and see God in it? How does he let this be okay if I see so many people hurting? Why do I see other people that are sinning and it looks like their life is better than mine, but I'm choosing to believe in God and my life is falling apart? How do I read this Bible and this stuff from the Old Testament, how do I make that make sense to my life? How is God relevant to my life? How does he show up for me? I don't see him. I don't feel him. I don't hear him. How am I supposed to believe? I want to believe. Guys, dealing with doubt is a part of growing your faith. And so I've got a couple ideas for you. Just two. The first one is stop ignoring it. Stop ignoring it. Admit it to yourself. It's okay. I'm telling you, it's okay. Please hear me that it's okay. I don't want doubt to create this separation and to stifle or feel like your faith has to crumble underneath it. I have seen it happen to people. I know I have had my close friends in high school. We went to youth group week after week after week, year after year. They went away to college, and their faith, their understanding of God, they didn't deal with their doubts. They showed up at college, and stuff didn't match what we had learned in youth group, and they didn't know how to talk to people about it, and they walked away. And I have conversations with them, and they just don't feel like God is there. They can't fit what their understanding is. But you know what? They didn't leave because they asked a question and they didn't get an answer that they wanted. They didn't ever ask the question. The things that were holding them back from fully trusting God, the things that they had unbelief in, were creating this separation, were creating cracks in the foundation of their faith that crumbled under the weight when they came into the real world because they didn't do the hard work of addressing their doubt. It wasn't because they got an answer to one of their questions. They never asked. So please ask. And that brings me to my second point. It doesn't mean that we have to sit and have this conversation in big group. I know that this can be something that's scary and feel very vulnerable. So pick one person, whether that's your small group leader, whether that's a parent that you really trust, whether it's a conversation you want to have with Steve or I. It's a safe place to doubt. God's a big God. I'll never forget hearing that. God can handle our doubt. God can handle if we're angry at him about something and we can't understand. So please don't let that stop you from asking your questions. Because it says in Matthew 22:37, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. God knows how he created us. He knows how we think about things. He created the way that our thoughts work. He wants us to use our mind to connect with him, and part of that is processing through the stuff that doesn't quite make sense to us. Dealing with doubt is a part of growing your faith, and it takes practice. I'm not saying that in order for you to grow in your faith, you have to lay out all the things you have issues with. If that's too much for you, that would be too much for me. Start with one question. Practice. Test out the water. If you share it with one person and you're not sure, try it on another. It takes time to grow our faith, but these are steps and things that we can do to move in that direction. But let me give you one more thing to think about. Your small group leaders don't have all the answers. I do not have all the answers. Your parents, they don't have all the answers. If we had all the answers, then we would be able to put God in a box, and he's so much bigger than that. Hallelujah. It's the mystery of God. It keeps it exciting. It reminds us who we are and our role. So keep that in mind. Just because there might not be a sufficient answer for you, it's okay to wrestle in that tension. Let that build your faith. Continue doing research and looking into it. Don't let it create this separation in your relationship with God. I want you to know that this is a safe place. 621, your small groups are safe places to ask these questions, to navigate these things. That's part of the reason we show up here, so you guys have a place to do that. It's one of our goals and our hopes. But remember that you have to do the work of stopping ignoring your doubt. So my goal for you is that you know, and for now and for years to come, you have a growing, healthy, strong, honest relationship with God. That if you do these things, if you show up in your community to sharpen each other, if you take steps to serve, even in a small way, maybe it's once a month, that you will see your faith grow. if you choose just this next time that you get in a tough pinch or things aren't quite working out the way you want them to, that you choose to trust God to work in you so it strengthens your faith in someone else, you will see your faith grow. But if you don't address your doubt, you're going to have those cracks in your foundation. And I'm saying that, I'm warning you that, because I care about you. And I care about your relationship with God. And I believe in you. And I know who God is, and I've experienced it for myself. So I'm going to pray now. I'm going to have everybody bow their heads. Leaders, I'm going to invite you to keep your heads up. Guys, while I'm praying, if you are wrestling with some doubt, if there's a conversation that you need to have, I'm gonna ask that you just raise your hand while I'm praying. Your small group leaders are gonna connect with you. I don't know if that's gonna look like in small group, but they'll follow up with you. But sometimes it's helpful to have someone initiate a challenging conversation with you. So again, while I pray, if you would just raise your hand and then we'll continue in worship, but I'll close out. God, thank you for this place where we can recognize that none of us have it all figured out. That we rest in the fact that you are a big God, full of mystery, but also in the same breath that you are able to shoulder all of our burdens and our doubts. God, we recognize that there are things that are challenging, that we can't quite piece together in our mind, but you've called us to love you with our mind. So I just pray over these students that they would take an opportunity to wrestle with their doubt, to not let that separate them. I know we live in a world and in a culture that says a lot of things about you, that says a lot of things about people that come together at church, have a lot of opinions. And that's hard. It's hard to wrestle with. It's hard to navigate what that looks like. I know it. I know they know it too. But we know that you're bigger than that. God, we love you. Jesus, thank you for your death on the cross. Thank you for your life on earth so that we can look at stories and see who you are. Thank you that you invite us to grow deeper in our faith. God, I just pray courage over these students, that they would take steps to have a deeper faith in you, because I believe, God, that you want that relationship with them more than they ever will. And it's a beautiful thing that you are coming after us and pursuing us, despite our hesitation, despite our doubt. God, we love you. We thank you for this place. Thank you for this time. With this all up in Jesus' powerful name, amen.